Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp, and welcome back to this video series on understanding God as far as we can and coming to know God as far as we can. The purpose of this video is to talk about how we have ordinary forms of knowledge where we try and have an intellectual comprehension of things, and how that is not a satisfactory way of trying to understand God, because God is beyond anything that we can comprehend. But there's also a different type of knowledge, which is a kind of direct, intuited, experiential knowledge. And we can come to know God through that second form of knowledge. And when this occurs, it's often described in terms of insight, it's described in terms of gnosis as a concept, and it's also described in terms of divine revelation. And it is through those types of knowledge and experience that we can know God. And there are practices that we can do in order to bring ourselves close enough to God to know God in that way. So that's what I'm talking about today. And to illustrate the two different types of knowledge that I'm talking about, I want to use love as an example. So you can have an intellectual idea of love. You can listen to love songs on the radio, you can read romance novels, and you can have an understanding of what love is. It's two people who have an attraction towards one another. And that's the idea of love. But you can have an idea of love, but you can't ever truly know what love is until you've had an experience of love. Until you've had your first romantic relationship, for example. You cannot truly have an intimate knowledge or understanding of what love is without that experience. And it's a way of knowing things by becoming immersed in them and coming into direct contact with them and experiencing them. And that is the way that we can come to know God. And as opposed to the intellectual way of understanding things one step removed by simple observation and forming an idea of them and measuring them. And it is possible to know something directly and through experience that we cannot know in an intellectual way. And God is an example of that. So then, how do we have an experience of God? Well, the way that we do that is through certain practices, the most effective of which is by far meditation. So if you've watched my previous videos, my previous two videos on how to understand God, which I will link in the description below, you will know that I talked about how when you strip away everything that we think that we are, our body, our mind, our thoughts, all of our conditioning, what's left there is something else. It's something which is at the root of our pure awareness, empty of its contents. And that thing is an endless emptiness and an endless potentiality. And that is what we truly are. That is what our awareness emerges from. But it's also the thing that is at the very center, at the very foundation of everything in the universe. It is, as some philosophers would say, the ground of all being. And so we come to realize that everything in existence, including ourselves, is, as Lao Tzu would say, the empty vessel. We see a pot, a vase, and we see how ornamental it is. We see that it has a material form. But within the pot there is emptiness. And the usefulness of the pot is in its very emptiness. And the thing that makes it what it is in the fact that it contains that emptiness within. And that is us, and that is the universe itself. And that emptiness, which is not truly empty at all, but is the infinite, that is God. And so, because those two things are identical, that fundamental level of all existence is identical with the fundamental level of ourselves. And of course, how could it be any other way? Because we are a part of existence. We are existence itself. But that fundamental level of reality is something that we can come to know by coming to know what we truly are. Because what we truly are is one and the same with that fundamental reality. And that's what we get to when we get to meditation. We still everything else. And what remains, and what remains in our awareness, which is nothing but awareness itself, that is how we can come to know God. And that's one method, but meditation tends to be a very cold sort of method. A lot of people prefer to approach God using delightful or beautiful kind of ideas as a link to that, to understanding God. And that's more common in yoga, it's more common in devotional practices in particular, and it's also more common in visionary work. And so when we have the fruit of a meditation, when we have the result of a meditation, then what that result is really an experience. It is really a state of consciousness or a state of being. And it is that experience that we have that is God. And when we get to the point in meditation where we have not only stilled all mental activity and all physical activity, and we're no longer responding to any internal or external stimuli, then the next step is to unite subject and object. And what we have then is a state of awareness or a state of being that is truly without bound or distinction. Because the last boundary that we must transgress in order to fully understand God is that distinction between self and other, subject and object. And when that's broken down, that is when we can experience God directly. And it'll only be for a brief moment at first. But it is an experience that will change us forever. And so when we're discussing any of these techniques for coming to know God, whether it's through meditation or through yoga or through prayer, which really is related to devotional practice, or visionary work indeed. What we're really talking about is a shift in perception or in perspective more than anything else. We have our ordinary perception of the sensory world that we perceive with our conscious mind, where everything is very well constructed and well regulated by our intelligence, but by our rational mind and our ability to form and categorize ideas. But as you move towards the divine and you move towards the transcendent, what's really happening is you're inhabiting the same existence as before, but you're starting to perceive that existence differently. You're starting to perceive it at a higher order of abstraction, and you're starting to perceive it at a more metaphysical level than just ordinary sensory awareness of the material world. And what that really means is you're slowly stripping away all of the distinctions between one thing and another. You're stripping away all the boundaries and all of the conditions between things, and you're starting to see more and more of the underlying unified reality that is common to all of them, and of which each of these seemingly individual things are only a function. And the best way to experience the divine, the most direct and clear way, is through that state that I talked about in meditation, where we still everything else but that pure awareness, and we allow that experience of the sublime, endless emptiness within us, which is not truly empty at all, but contains all potential to unfold. But there are some techniques that we can use to approach the divine, such as visionary work, such as practices where we approach a particular God form, a particular deity, as a representation symbolically of the divine or some aspect of the divine, and we're trying to relate to the divine through the medium of some kind of symbol. And when we try and relate to the divine in that way, when we try and approach God, when we still have some part of our mind and the mechanics of our mind engaged, it can make for some very, very strange kinds of experiences. If you're the same age as me, you probably remember when the Pokemon games came out on Game Boy. Pokemon Red and Blue, the original Pokemon games. And the way that the game world was programmed was there were all of these different Pokemon that you could encounter. And they were programmed in, and you knew what to expect. But there was a glitch in the game where there was a Pokemon which wasn't supposed to be there, called Missing No. And because it was a glitch, it was unfamiliar to the rest of the programming of the game world. When the computer tried to process what that thing was, it didn't produce anything that looked like any of the other Pokemon. It just produced a mess of pixels and squares, and some really strange things would start to go on in the game. And so that's an example of when you have in this case, a virtual reality, which is governed by a certain set of rules, where in order to perceive things in that world, they need to follow those rules. And if you introduce something which is not familiar to that closed system, and the closed system tries to process it, it creates something very bizarre. And for the virtual characters experiencing that thing that they're confronted with, it's very strange indeed. And it's the same when we get close to God or some aspect of God or some level of existence or perception which is closer to the divine than ordinary perception. Then if our mind is still engaged, we start to get some very weird things going on, and we start to see, whether in our internal imagination or elsewhere, we see some very strange things. This is why when the prophets in the Bible encounter angels, they're so terrifying. People think that angels are these beautiful beings who wear flowing white gowns and have wings and halos. But that's not the way that they're described in the Bible. In the Bible, if you meet an angel face to face in its true form, it is a terrifying vision of flaming wheels and eyes and wings and feathers and all sorts of things. And it's always very terrifying for the people that are perceiving them. And that's an example of encountering a missing no in our world, when you're encountering something that is so beyond this world, but you're trying to make sense of it as though it is a thing that is in this world. The result is you see these really unusual things in front of you. And it happens even today with modern Western ceremonial magic. People who do Enochian scryings, for example, to try and talk to angels. They often see the angels in their internal imagination as these really odd, shifting geometric shapes. Nothing like what you would expect an angel to look like, unless you're talking about perhaps the angels from Neon Genesis Evangelion. But these are the sorts of entities that people see time and time again when they try and call forth angels. So when you start to approach that event horizon of the divine, of the transcendent, your mind starts to do strange things. But when you succeed in touching that divine, when you succeed in using some technique to silence conscious thought for one moment and see more deeply and try and perceive things more deeply, then that can be the source of some truly profound insights, not only into the nature of divinity and of God, but into life itself. When you see the underlying unified order of all existence and you observe that and you allow things to emerge spontaneously from that awareness, then you can gain insights into all sorts of things. And they can be things that change your life. And they can be insights that you receive which change civilization itself. It's no coincidence that in every story of the beginning of a great world religion, the founder of the religion goes out into the wilderness or into the forest, and they have an experience, they have a direct encounter with either God or some underlying absolute level of reality. And it is from that direct contact, whether through prayer or meditation or what have you, that they receive a new revelation. They receive information of such depth and such understanding that the conscious mind, with all of its assumptions and discriminations, would never be able to reach. And from that, they bring knowledge which is so profound that it becomes the basis of a new religion. And we see that story repeated time and time again. Muhammad goes up to the mountain. Buddha goes into the forest and sits under the Bodhi tree. Jesus goes into the wilderness before he begins his ministry. Moses is exiled from Egypt, goes into Midian, and then encounters the burning bush on the mountain. It's always the same story, it's just different characters. And so that gives you an idea of how divine revelation, how direct contact with the divine using spiritual techniques can profoundly transform human life. And it is of the utmost importance that it is the thing that is the progenitor of religions. It is by having a direct experience of the divine, you go directly to the source of all of the wisdom of all of the world's religions. And there's no priesthood that you need to appeal to mediate that experience for you. It is just pure and direct, and you can understand it for yourself, and you can have a first-hand experience of God, and that is an incredible thing. And I will be discussing the sorts of techniques that you can do to have those sorts of experiences, and I'll be discussing them on this channel. So if you want more content like that, please subscribe to my channel, and you will be able to benefit from that information as soon as I release it. So thank you once again for listening, and I'll see you next time.